On today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, we will be discussing Tyler Hudson, Jawar Jordan, and Brock Domann. With that being said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I serve as a credential media member for Cardinal Sports Zone. I also do some PA announce work for the university in various sports. I want to take this time to say thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. We'll be discussing three individual players on today's episode of the show. The first two segments will be talking about players that aren't being talked about enough. Tyler Hudson in the first segment, we'll talk about why he's not being discussed enough on the national scale. And then in the second segment, we'll be discussing running back Jawar Jordan not being talked about enough by the fan base. And in the final segment, we will analyze the quarterback position for 2022, specifically speaking on Brock Domann winning the backup quarterback position. So let's get right on into it. Tyler Hudson, the wide receiver transfer from Central Arkansas. I've said on this show time and time again, look, I think that he is going to be a flat-out star. He's not being talked about enough on the national scale. Yes, look, I get it. From a local standpoint within the fan base, a lot of fans are pretty familiar with the name Tyler Hudson. They understand, look, he's going to make a solid impact for this year's team, may lead the team in receiving. But let me just offer this as my opinion. I think that Tyler Hudson is the best kept secret in the ACC this fall. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, obviously, people know who Tyler Hudson is, so you can't take this from a literal standpoint. I'm not saying people don't even know who Tyler Hudson is. Look, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is the fact that he is going to take this conference by storm. Now, when you say that, you really put yourself in a vulnerable position to be ridiculed and to be criticized, which I mean that's kind of the case with every hot take. Obviously, if you're going out on a limb and saying something that not necessarily is far-fetched, but it's not necessarily a lock to come true, I think you're putting yourself in a position to where you're putting yourself in that position to be scrutinized, to be criticized, whatever you may be able to put out there. So what I mean by that, and what I'm trying to get at is what I'm alluding to is that saying that Tyler Hudson is the best kept secret in the ACC, obviously you could be very right or very wrong. Even if he has a decent season where he's got like 600 or 700 receiving yards and a couple touchdowns to his name, still that doesn't kind of warrant the whole best kept secret in the ACC tag. But I truly do believe that his skill set, the opportunity, there is a lot of things that lead me to claim that Tyler Hudson is going to be that guy. Number one is the open opportunity. Obviously, with the University of Louisville's wide receiving committee, there's a lot of moving pieces from last year to this year. Not only that, but there's not a lot of returning guys, some younger players. Right now, I think that there's 8 guys on scholarship. 3 of them are coming back from last year's team, and one of those guys, actually 4, because Jalen Carter has put on scholarship as well. 4 of those guys were on scholarship last year. The numbers aren't that high anyway in terms of guys returning and guys coming in. 8 scholarship players is kind of low for the wide receiving position. But on top of that, Braden Smith is coming off of a year to where he went down, I think, what was it, the 4th game of the season with that injury against Florida State. But regardless, it seems like the talk in the fall camp is that Braden Smith is he's seemingly back to full health and even maybe better than he was last season, which is incredible to hear and good news for the Louisville fan base. And yes, you have guys that are in spots to make some big time impacts because you have You have Braden Smith, you have Amari Huggins-Bruce, who's primed to be a star in year 2. Josh Johnson is a reliable target. You have D. Wiggins, the Miami transfer, who a lot of people are talking good things about. And then you have 2 freshmen in Chris Bell and Chance Morrow, who could also see some significant snaps this season. Not to mention, hey, you have an offense that is really, predicated on the run. You have a solid amount of running backs. Those guys can catch passes out of the backfield. Marshawn Ford, in my opinion, the best tight end in the ACC is, he's back. So, and then you have a dual threat quarterback who really makes things happen on the ground with his legs. So the question is, what constitutes, what constitutes a best kept secret in the ACC type season? I mean, what warrants that? At what point statistically does he get to where you're like, okay, that makes sense, that you're on to something here, Dalton? I mean, I'm not going to say he has to be a 1,000-yard receiver, because in Louisville's offense, context wise, who knows what that looks like, but I wouldn't necessarily rule it out. But people don't look at context when they make these assumptions. When you look at you look at Tyler Harrell's season last year, the guy who transferred to Alabama, he only had 500 receiving yards. But when you look at his targets, his yards per reception, the amount of times or the amount that Louisville ran the football, hey, look, it was impressive to get 500 yards. So am I saying that Tyler Hudson's going to cross over that 1,000-yard threshold? I'm not saying that. Is it possible? Yeah, of course it is. Would it surprise me if he does? No, because Tyler Hudson is a very, very premier talent, and that's something that I want to transition into. We talked about the opportunity. The opportunities are there because there are so much workload to go around in that wide receiving committee. And right now, I think, there's probably 3 to 4 guys that you can truly trust in this group heading into that first game against Syracuse here on Saturday. But Tyler Hudson, look, he's got the talent. He's the guy that not a lot of people are talking about in this not a lot of people are talking about in the conference and on the national scale. For Central Arkansas, he was named the freshman of the year back in 2019, a freshman All-American as well. Was a 2020 preseason All-Conference second team. Was named the SLC Offensive Player of the Year in 2020. First team All-SLC as a wide receiver and punt returner, and an All-American last season as well. So he's racked up the individual accolades last season for the Central Arkansas Bears. He had 62 receptions for 1,229 yards. So that's something to focus on there. It is just that he has that that ability to really affect the game in a lot of different ways. Reminds me a lot of Dez Fitzpatrick. And what I mean by that, when you put them side by side, Hudson has, similar size, might not necessarily have as much strength as Dez Fitzpatrick. Both of them were in the 6'2" area. I want to think Dez was in like the 225 mark, but I could be completely wrong. Hudson listed as 197 pounds, 62 receptions, 1,229 yards, 8 touchdowns last year for Tyler Hudson, 19.8 yards per reception. When you bring in these when you bring in these transfers, especially maybe from the FCS ranks or maybe a non-Power 5 transfer that doesn't necessarily play the competition that you do, yeah, I mean, you have the right to question how good they're going to be at the Power 5 level, especially for Louisville. Seemingly all of the talk out of fall camp is that they have been really raving about what he's been able to do. He's been a tough matchup for the opposing defensive backs, and Louisville has a very solid group of cornerbacks and safeties. So I think that definitely holds some merit. I was talking to someone in the know, and they were saying, hey, look, Tyler Hudson is going to have a fantastic season. He had a quote that I actually wrote down. He texted to me. He said, I don't necessarily feel comfortable putting a high draft grade on Tyler Hudson yet because I don't necessarily think that that's fair. He could have a solid season and still get drafted a little lower because that's how things go in the NFL draft. But would it surprise me if he heard his name in the first 3 to 4 rounds? No, it would not. So I think that that's pretty neat, the fact that we are hearing some very solid things, and you're going up against a solid secondary here at Louisville in practice and in the offseason and fall camp. It's about building that camaraderie and chemistry with quarterback Malik Cunningham. So that's huge to have. And I think that he's going to be a guy that could be kind of a safety blanket here for Malik Cunningham. Has sort of deceptive speed, does a good job of high pointing the football, a solid route runner with good footwork. I think route running may be my favorite thing about his game, and there's a lot of things to love about his game. There's not one thing that he does that's extremely better than his other qualities, but he does pretty much everything, very solid. And that's how former wide receiver coach Gunter Brewer described Dez Fitzpatrick ahead of the 2020 season. So that's something to look forward to, and I'm very, very excited to see what Tyler Hudson can do in this offense. In my opinion, he is the best-kept secret in the ACC. But transitioning over into discussing a player that isn't necessarily talked about enough by this fan base, that is former Syracuse transfer running back Jawar Jordan. We are going to discuss why I believe that here in just a second as we talk about a message from our friends over at NHTSA. Are you one of those people who thinks it's okay to drive stoned? What's the worst that can happen? You end up driving below the speed limit? It's no big deal, right? Wrong. The truth is, your reaction times slow way down when you're high. You not only put yourself in danger, but everyone else around you as well. Talk about being a buzzkill. Stop kidding yourself. It's not okay to drive high. If you've been using marijuana in any form, do not get behind the wheel. If you feel different, you drive different. Drive high or get a DUI. Hey, Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On the Louisville your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On the Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. We're going to discuss on the next episode released at some point today on Monday, August 29th, for those who need a reminder on what the date is. Jawar Jordan was named the backup running back. Or actually, he was backup running back was like Jawar Jordan or Jalen Mitchell or Travion Cooley, all three of those guys behind Tennessee transfer Tyon Evans. Jawar Jordan is the player that not a lot of people are talking about within this fan base, and some are, but not enough nearly. Jordan last season didn't necessarily have that big of a year. Was a factor on special teams, had the kick return for the touchdown against Air Force in the bowl game, rushed for under 100 yards, had 14 carries on 94. Had 14 carries that resulted in 94 yards. The longest rush was a 21-yard rush, had one reception for 24 yards, no touchdowns, 6.7 yards per carry. Came into the program before fall camp, right in early August. So didn't necessarily get a ton of time to get acclimated with the playbook, acclimated with the rest of the offense and the roster as a whole. And not to mention, you had Travion Cooley, Jalen Mitchell, Hassan Hall, Maurice Berkeley, all competing for touches as well. And that's going to be the case this year. So what I mean when I say that he's not being talked about enough by Louisville fans, I'm not going to say he's going to come out and have a 1,000-yard rushing season, because it would probably surprise me if any Louisville running back had things of that nature. So really the focus here, in my opinion, is, hey, let's call a spade, and that's the fact that Jawar Jordan has a skill set that really isn't like any of the other guys in the position. I think that the key here for the Cardinals, when you focus on the running back position as a whole, is that there's a lot of I'm not going to say the same type of running back because they all have their different strengths, but Tyon Evans, Jalen Mitchell, and Travion Cooley, a lot of their, premier attribute is kind of based upon that strength. Mainly Jalen Mitchell, but Travion Cooley has that strength. Tyon Evans, even though he's kind of a smaller running back, has that strength as well. But Jawar Jordan is kind of the only true quote-unquote speed back for this Louisville running backs committee. I think that all four have upside as receivers coming out of the backfield, so I'm not going to say that he's the only receiving threat in the committee, but I think that Jawar Jordan has that ability to be that change of pace back, and I think that offers the opportunity to really offer some nice contrast as opposed to Tyon Evans, Mitchell, and Cooley. And that's no disrespect to any of these other guys, right? I mean, I think that at the end of the day, it's really all about who is the hot hand, who poses the best matchup against a respective opponent. So I'm not saying that Jawar Jordan's going to get 25 yards per carry or 25 yards per carry, 25 carries per game, or he's going to be the guy that gets the most touches. Heck, he may even get the least amount of touches of the four running backs when it comes to handoffs, but I think that he's going to offer a huge possibility in the third down game, as a change of pace back. And when I say that he's not being talked about enough by the fan base, look, I'm not saying that I think that the fan base is not giving him his credit in a sense that he's going to have some big numbers. I'm saying that there's going to be times this season where I think that Jawar Jordan is going to make some big time plays that could go a long way in helping Louisville win a respective game. I think that, maybe in third and long situations is where he gets his number called. Third and short situations. Third down is where I think we're going to see Jawar Jordan the most, in my opinion. You could also see him in the return game as well, and that's something to focus on. I'm not necessarily sure. I'd have to go back and look at the depth chart in terms of where he's at as a kick returner or a punt returner. But I think that at the end of the day, this is an instance to where, look, there's always a couple players that don't get talked about enough, and by default, I mean, you can't talk about every player in the length, and not every single player can be a possible breakout candidate, because then that term becomes a little watered down. You start to take away the significance of that, right? So but Jawar Jordan is one of those guys to where I've even kind of not been talking about him enough, but it seems like he's done really well in fall camp. The same person that says some good things about Tyler Hudson had a lot of good things to say about the offensive line, had a lot of good things to say about the secondary. Jawar Jordan was one of the players in the running back committee that looked very, very solid. It's going to be just a matter of who's the hot hand, what running back poses the best matchup for other opponents and things of that nature. So same thing with Tyler Hudson here. I think that you have to understand that context matters, and there's a lot of mouths to feed in this Louisville offense in terms of the skill positions. And not only that, you have a quarterback in Malik Cunningham who does a great job of creating his own offense on the ground in terms of scrambling and getting out of the pocket with his legs. So, yeah, I mean, I think that on this episode, my intention isn't to create unrealistic expectations. It's more so to tell you all, hey, look, these guys are going to have some big-time plays. They're going to be guys that we're going to rely upon at some points this season. I think Tyler Hudson has, maybe a little bit more upside because of the opportunity at hand. But, hey, Jawar Jordan's a guy that you cannot overlook in this running back committee. I think that, that change of pace possibility for Scott Satterfield in the running back department is something that they're going to look to utilize a little bit more. Lance Taylor's been a guy that has coached players that have, been in that mold. Christian McCaffrey is a guy, yeah, he's a dynamic runner, but he's also a fantastic receiver as well. So, having that, contrast and skill set is something big to focus on. So, with the final segment, we'll talk about Brock Domann winning the backup quarterback battle. I do want to point out for the viewers out there, I know that the background isn't aesthetically pleasing. It's a little bit better than the plain all-white background, but I have purchased a green screen from Amazon. So I'm very, very excited to share that news with you. The fact that there will be a different background coming up here shortly. So that's I'm not sure exactly when it's going to be delivered. So be patient with me there. But very, very excited to be able to share that news with you and tell you that the days of having a predominantly white a predominantly white background in terms of the wallpaper and no memorabilia, those days are pretty much over. So very, very excited to share that news. But Brock Domann, and I do apologize if I'm saying his name wrong. I've heard it pronounced Brock Domann. I think it's Brock Domann. If I'm wrong on that, please forgive my ignorance. But the he won the backup quarterback battle over Evan Conley, over Caleb Johnson. Domann last season didn't necessarily have any. He didn't have any. I don't think he made a completed pass. Last year he had 1 or 2 carries for 5 yards against Duke in that game, on that Thursday game in which Louisville won in lopsided fashion. The junior from Colorado Springs, Colorado, not California, transfer from the JUCO area, 6'2", 228 pounds. A lot of people, when he came here, it was like, oh, they just added another body to the quarterback room. I was told at that point, no, like they really do believe in his tools. They believe in his skill set. They think that he has a solid arm and that he has a lot of upside at the Power 5 level. Now, obviously, that may be your standard cliche talk where, hey, look, yeah, they brought in a guy that they believe in, obviously, duh. But no, it seems like there was some actual traction that he could be a guy competing for that backup quarterback position, and he won that battle. Evan Conley last season, I know that he's been battling injury, I think, with his shoulder. I'm not necessarily sure if that's something that's still lingering for him, but Domann winning that quarterback battle really doesn't surprise me. I think that Caleb Johnson is probably a redshirt candidate. He's looked good in fall camp, so who knows? He could be a guy that might see some snaps in games if Louisville is involved in blowouts. So, with the rule that you can play 4 games before redshirting. So that's interesting. But yeah, it doesn't really surprise me here that Domann won the quarterback battle. People are thinking, oh, well, does it really matter who wins the backup quarterback position? Yes, it does. There's been many, documented instances over the past couple seasons. 2019, for example, Evan Conley had to come in and play that backup quarterback role when Malik Cunningham went out and Jawan Pass was dealing with injury. And, he went into some games and he won some games. I mean, the Wake Forest game, for example, down in Winston-Salem in 2019, that shootout with the Demon Deacons. Yeah, that was a key battle in which Evan Conley, a backup quarterback, came in and played some big-time snaps. 2021, we saw it when Malik Cunningham went down against Clemson. And that was an instance to where, hey, look, if Malik Cunningham plays that whole game, there's a good rationale to say that Louisville was probably going to win that game. They were controlling the game on offense. The Tigers simply had no answer for Malik Cunningham. And then Evan Conley came in and just wasn't able to do much on the offensive side of the ball. So the backup quarterback position, sure, it might not necessarily every single game be a big deal, but all it takes is for one injury. And Malik Cunningham, I'm not saying that he's injury prone, because over the past 2 seasons, he's done a good job of, avoiding hits, throwing the ball away when he needs to, getting out of bounds, scrambling out of bounds. But there's always an instance to where, hey, look, one game, there's a big difference between 6-6 and 7-5. There's a big difference between 7-5 and 8-4. Your quarterback going down can cost you one, if not multiple, one of those games. Lord forbid, knock on wood, Malik Cunningham goes through an injury, because he is such a focal point of this offense that, hey, look, the backup quarterback position matters. And that's not to say that Evan Conley or Caleb Johnson can't fill that role as well, but Domann winning the backup quarterback battle here, it is significant news, and it's news that we need to talk about. Sure, it might not necessarily be the most notable news, and it does offer a little bit of, not necessarily concern, but maybe intrigue would be the best word, because Domann has yet to complete a pass, but that would kind of fit along with the narrative that this coaching staff does believe in that upside and they believe in his potential. It's just a matter of helping him with the playbook, helping him to start to read Power 5 college defenses, and working on building up that confidence, because it seems like this coaching staff really believes in his talent. So, we talked about Tyler Hudson, Jawar Jordan, and Brock Domann. There will be 2 episodes on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday as we conclude the month, heading into the first official game for the Louisville Cardinals. We'll talk about the depth chart and that opening matchup against Syracuse, along with the Monday mailbag on the next episode of the show. But that's going to wrap up this first Monday edition. Everyone have a great day. Have a great start to your week. We will see you right back here very